It's July 1944. The world is on fire. A small group of German officers decided they had to do something. They weren't looking for glory. They weren't trying to win a medal. They wanted to stop the killing. They saw Hitler as the destroyer of Germany. The war was already lost in their eyes. Every day meant more death. More cities turned to rubble. More young men sent to die for a cause they didn't believe in. Killing their own leader was the only moral choice left. The only way to end the madness and save what was left. Claus von Stauffenberg was one of them. He was a colonel. He was a patriot. He had fought bravely for Germany. He'd served on many fronts. In North Africa, a British fighter strafed his vehicle. He lost his left eye. He lost his right hand. He lost 2 fingers on his left. But those weren't the deepest wounds. The real wound was to his soul. He'd seen the horrors of the Nazi regime up close, the mass killings, the lies, the total disregard for human life. He could not stand by as his country was driven into ruin by a madman. So he joined a secret group of officers. Their plan was simple and terrifying. Kill Hitler, seize power, try to make peace. The urgency was immense. The Allies had landed in Normandy. The Soviet army was crushing German forces in the east. Germany was being closed in on all sides. They felt the weight of millions of lives on their shoulders. The place was called the Wolf's Lair. Wolfschanze. It sounded like something from a dark fairy tale. Hidden deep in the thick, damp forests of East Prussia, it was Hitler's main military headquarters on the Eastern Front. A place of secrets and shadows. Concrete bunkers, wooden huts, all camouflaged beneath the trees, barbed wire, minefields, checkpoints, the nerve center of the Nazi war machine, surrounded by his most trusted generals and fanatical followers, Hitler directing the slaughter of millions, a fortress built to keep the world out, and power locked inside. The meeting on July 20th was supposed to be in the Führer bunker, a massive windowless tomb underground. Had it been there, history might have been different. A bomb blast in that confined space would have been utterly devastating. Nothing would have survived. But the weather was hot, sweltering. At the last minute, the meeting was moved to a wooden conference hut with windows kept open to let in a breeze. Inside the hut, a long, heavy oak table dominated the room, solid wood, thick and sturdy. Generals, field marshals, aides, and at its head, Adolf Hitler. The air was thick with tension, fear, ambition, men jostling for favor. Hitler's moods were legendary, charming one moment, erupting into a screaming rage the next. Stauffenberg knew this place. As Chief of Staff of the Reserve Army, he was a familiar face, walking through checkpoints, saluting guards, carrying a normal leather briefcase. The plan was a study in precision and nerve. Everything depended on timing. Stauffenberg arrived at the Wolf's Lair with his aide, Werner von Haften. They had 2 bombs, each a kilogram of explosive. The original idea was to use both. But things began to go wrong. Time was tight. A phone call interrupted him as he tried to arm the bombs in a small anteroom. He was being hurried. He only had time to prime one of the 2 explosive blocks. He armed one. The other he left with his aide. This rushed decision cut the power of the explosion in half before it had even happened. With the armed bomb in his briefcase, Stauffenberg walked into the conference hut. The meeting was already underway. Hitler was there, leaning over the huge oak table, studying maps. About 20 officers in the room. Stauffenberg was greeted by Field Marshal Keitel. He apologized for being late. He was directed to a spot a few places down from Hitler's right. Every eye was on the maps. No one paid much attention to the one-eyed, one-handed colonel, or the briefcase he carried. He moved closer, then placed it on the floor, inside the massive oak table support, and slid it under with his foot, just a few feet from Hitler's legs. The target was in place. The bomb was set. Now he had to get out, before the tiny acid capsule ate through a wire and completed its 10-minute countdown. He whispered about an urgent call from Berlin and walked calmly into the bright air. As Stauffenberg and his aide drove away, A small, almost insignificant event happened back in the conference hut. Colonel Heinz Brandt found the briefcase was in his way. He wanted a closer look at the map. He nudged the briefcase with his foot. He pushed it further under the table, to the other side of the thick oak trestle. A simple, thoughtless action, just making room for his feet. But he placed a shield of wood between the bomb and its target. The fuse dissolved. The detonator fired. At 12:42 p.m. the hut exploded. A deafening boom, a flash of yellow-blue light, wooden walls splintering, roof blasted and collapsing. Smoke filled the room, dust, scorched paper. Men were thrown like dolls. From a distance, Stauffenberg and Haifton saw smoke above the trees. They assumed no one survived, but Hitler wasn't dead. The table support acted like a blast shield, absorbing force and shrapnel. Open windows let pressure escape. 4 men were killed, including Colonel Brandt. Many others were seriously injured. Hitler thrown across the room, trousers shredded, eardrums perforated, burns and splinters in his legs. He was alive, helped to his feet, stumbling out as his followers proclaimed a miracle. For a few short hours, the fate of Germany hung in the balance. In Berlin, hundreds of miles away, the conspirators began to put their plan into motion. Believing Hitler was dead, they issued orders under Operation Valkyrie, a contingency plan, ironically approved by Hitler, to use the reserve army to crush a coup. They intended to use it to seize control of the city, arresting key Nazi and SS leaders. For a brief moment, it seemed to be working. But the foundation was built on sand. It all rested on Hitler's death. As news of his survival spread, the momentum faltered. Officers who might have obeyed balked. Loyalty to an oath weighed heavy. When the Führer was confirmed alive, the plot collapsed like a house of cards. The commander of the reserve army, General Fromm, tried to save himself and turned on the conspirators. As evening fell, loyal troops surrounded the Bendler block. There was a brief, confused firefight in the corridors. Then it was over. Fromm declared a summary court-martial. That night, in the Bendler block courtyard, Claus von Stauffenberg and 3 co-conspirators were executed by firing squad. Stauffenberg's last words were said to be, "Long live our sacred Germany." Hitler's survival unleashed a wave of vengeance terrifying in its scope and cruelty. He was not just angry, he was pathologically furious. Betrayed by men of the officer corps, the class he had always distrusted, he sank into permanent paranoia. He saw enemies everywhere. He trusted no one. His response was to eradicate any trace of opposition, real or imagined. He gave Heinrich Himmler and the Gestapo a blank check to hunt down anyone connected to the plot. The purge had begun. The crackdown was called Action Gewitter, Operation Storm. It was a storm of arrests, torture, murder. They arrested not just officers, but their families, friends, colleagues, anyone who had ever voiced a doubt or appeared in the wrong address book. This was not about justice. It was about terror, making an example so brutal that no one would dare defy the Führer again. The People's Court, presided over by Roland Freisler, was a theater of humiliation, screaming, insults, no chance to speak. The trials were filmed for Hitler's private cinema. At Plötzensee, many were hanged from meat hooks with piano wire, strangled slowly, painfully, filmed as a warning to others. The failure of the 20th of July plot did more than lead to the deaths of the plotters. It crushed the soul of the German resistance. Before the attempt, a fragile network of military and civilian leaders believed change was possible. They had contacts. They had plans. After the plot failed and the purge began, that hope was extinguished. To speak out, to even think of acting, was to invite not just your own death, but the suffering of your entire family. The military was brought to heel. The traditional Prussian officer corps was shattered. Hitler enforced a new oath, unconditional loyalty to him personally. The SS gained power, infiltrating command. Propaganda painted the plotters as cowardly aristocrats who stabbed the nation in the back. Hitler's survival was sold as a miracle. The war machine ground on. The next 10 months were among the bloodiest in history. The Holocaust accelerated. Cities were obliterated. Millions more died. It is one of history's most haunting questions. What if? What if Colonel Brandt had not moved the briefcase? What if Stauffenberg had armed the second bomb? What if Hitler had died on the 20th of July 1944? To imagine this alternate path is to step into a world of shadows and possibilities. It is impossible to know for certain. Had the plot succeeded, the conspirators planned to negotiate with the Western Allies. General Ludwig Beck would become head of state, a ceasefire in the West, holding the line in the East. Their hopes were likely naive. The Allies had committed to unconditional surrender, and Stalin would not accept a strong Germany. A messy power struggle might have followed. Even so, Hitler's death would have changed everything. The will to fight to the last man would have faltered. A ceasefire in the West could have saved hundreds of thousands and ended the Holocaust months earlier. In the end, the story of the 20th of July 1944 is a story of inches and seconds, how the grand sweep of history can be altered by the smallest of details. A meeting moved from a bunker to a hut. A hurried man who has time to arm one bomb instead of two. A single, thoughtless nudge of a briefcase under a table. These are simple, human moments, chance, luck, small decisions, that ripple outward with unimaginable consequences. The men of July 20th were not perfect. Many had supported the regime early on. But at a crucial moment, they found their conscience and chose to act. Their courage is a testament, their failure, a tragedy, for them and for the millions who died after. That is why this moment matters. The fate of the world can hang by the thinnest of threads.